Hey guys, and welcome to episode 157 of the OCDStories.com podcast. Now, in this episode, I got on Sean Shinnock. Sean is an OCD advocate and artist based in Boston. And I got the pleasure of getting to know Sean in Denver at Chrissy's Game Changers event last year. And since then, he's become a good friend. So I was very happy to finally convince him to come on the podcast and share his OCD story with you. And he does do that, and he does it in so much detail. It's a brilliant story. I think you're going to find it engaging. And hopefully you can relate to some parts and find it useful. But yeah, in it, obviously, we talk lots about his story. We talk about monsters as metaphors. He's got the Monster Initiative, which was originally Draw Your Monster, where he got people in workshops to, draw OCD or whatever it was that was bothering them as a monster and kind of putting it down on paper. And he says there's some real self-compassion in that, and you can get some distance from what's bothering you. We talk about how he started his advocacy. We talk about creativity. We talk about how art helps him, and he goes into detail about almost the philosophy of art. It's really interesting. And there was so much more I wanted to ask him, but I couldn't get around to it. So we've agreed to do a part 2, which is coming very soon. But yeah, this episode is brilliant. I love chatting with Sean. He's a really good guy. So hopefully you pick up on that energy and find it useful too. So without further ado, here is Sean. On the podcast today, I have Sean Shinnock. Sean is an artist, advocate, and creator of the Monster Initiative, with Draw Your Monster being a project under that umbrella. He has kindly agreed to share his OCD story with us and talk about the Monster Initiative. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you on, and a little context for everyone listening. I was aware of you for some time, but we met at Chrissy's Game Changers event in Denver. We actually roomed together.
Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah.
It was a really intimate way of meeting someone.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm rooming with Stuart Ralph from the OCD Stories. I was like, heck yeah, that was really cool.
I don't think you snored, which was good. I'm not sure about me.
I don't know. We were good. We were good. I think I slept in a little bit later than you did.
Yeah, maybe on one of the days. Yeah, which surprises me because I usually lay in.
I can hibernate pretty well with the best of them.
Okay, that's good. Well, yeah, we'll obviously see you again this year. It's only a couple months away.
Can't wait.
But yeah, as you know, I always get people's OCD story to start with. So in as little or as much detail as you want, share your OCD story with us.
Yeah, so my story kind of followed the same lines, or the statistic that you hear a lot of people espouse about. It takes about 14 to 17 years for people to get treatment. Yeah. And that's about what it took me to get proper treatment. I finally got treatment at 32. And I think the onset of the really, really true symptoms of OCD, kind of the traditional symptoms, was like 13 or 14. But looking back, I can definitely see OCD tendencies, way back to 8 or 9 or 10. Really worried a lot about stuff that probably didn't worry other kids or as much. I remembered being specifically obsessed with my mom's health as a 7-8-year-old kid, and I remember being specifically worried about the environment as a 7-year-old kid in the 80s. And I remember that was when they first really started to drop the greenhouse gas stuff and all that things. And I remember learning and reading about it when I was like in 4th grade. So my anxiety wrapped up around the ozone layer having a big hole in it.
Yeah.
And it wrapped around the fact that my mom smoked cigarettes and liked to lay out in the sun a lot, so I would obsess constantly about her health, whether she was going to get cancer, whether she was going to get skin cancer. And then I remember being so obsessed about it that I would be at the pool with my friends, and they were all diving off the high dive, and I'm on the payphone calling my mom to make sure there wasn't a gas leak, and that if there was, she should get out of the house. And those were, those were definitely anxiety provoking, but they didn't at that point, if I remember correctly, didn't really inhibit the contentment of my life yet.
Yeah.
Like I was still okay. I was a worrier kid, highly sensitive, but in terms of full-on OCD symptomology or panic or high levels of anxiety, I don't remember having those until I was 13, until I had a massive panic attack in my bedroom. And it was so massive, and I'm sure other people could maybe relate, when maybe to the day or the hour where they felt like their mind broke for the first time, where they could, they could retrospectively go back and look and see where everything started. And I had an intrusive thought at 10:20 on January 19th. It was a Monday of 1993, and it's an intrusive thought that I wanted to stab and kill my dad. And that exploded my little brain inside my head. And I've had a lot of panic attacks in my life. The first panic attack, I didn't know what it was at the time, but I can look back and see that it was a panic attack. That panic attack was on and off for the entire night. The panic attacks don't last long, actually. Your body physically can't deal with the amount of anxiety and stress, so it goes high, panic, almost to a delusional state, and then you come back down. That night, I went up and down all night long. Like I would have high panic attacks, come back down, wonder what's going on, panic attack again. And it happened from about 10 o'clock till about 4 in the morning. And my brain, the uncertainty of the thought that I had, basically was telling me that I was an evil person and that I was a psychopath and that I had homicidal tendencies. And as a 13-year-old kid who's trying to navigate the social environment of 7th grade or 8th grade, that was a lot to add on to it. And that was a night that I remember really starting the road of OCD, or at least intrusive thought-based OCD. And I didn't have the full-on physical compulsionary aspect until high school. In the beginning, there was more rumination and panic revolved around the OCD, or some people would say the pure OCD, or the ruminative response OCD, whereas a lot of the stuff was just in my head, and it didn't trickle into physical compulsions until I was in freshman year or sophomore year of high school, where it started to evolve into where I didn't know what to do with these things anymore. I needed my anxiety to go down, so my brain was telling me that I needed to do certain things in order to make these things go away. And a lot of it was the offsetting of negative things, or the magical thinking. I became very superstitious with minor things. If I didn't write the number 4 correctly on math problems, or if I didn't touch, it got so minute to the fact that if I didn't release the pencil from the paper and it didn't feel right when that lead left the mass of the paper, then I had to do it again. And that severely affected my grades and affected a lot of things. And I was going through a lot of other things at that time. My mom was dying of cancer, and there was a lot of stress in the family and high school and stuff like that. And I don't know the other listeners who may be listening who were teenagers or kids living in the 90s, early 90s, but it was still people were just starting to talk about mental health and being okay with asking for help, but there was still there's still heavy stigma now.
Yeah.
But in 1992, my only experience with mental health was a couple movies that I saw where they put people into straitjackets, or they put them in a padded cell, or they were lobotomized, or they were electrocuted. And the only experience I had to any child struggling with something that wasn't even, properly named at the time was in health class. There was like one day where they showed like a video of a Maury Povich show, and there's some kid who had obviously now OCD symptoms, but they didn't know what to call it. It was just some weird kid on the TV who was doing weird stuff, and you just didn't want to be like that, or you didn't want to admit you're like that because, again, middle school, high school, anybody who's lived through that, it's very socially motivated, and if you're an oddball, which I'm sure many people have been and know what that's like, if you have that internally, you mask that and you don't want to talk about it. So, especially the content, it wasn't like I could go and talk to someone who would maybe listen to me talk about being sad or depressed or struggling with my mom. How do you go and talk to someone who was like, I just had a thought about stabbing my dad. How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
Here are my wrists. Put a handcuff on me now. Take me away. And that was the fear. So I never really spoke about it at all, and I never got therapy in high school. I remember just having a brief assessment where they thought I had ADHD, and that was just me kind of like lying a little bit about what I was actually going through, and they probably were like, this kid just can't pay attention. And so that progressed through high school. I became ineligible for my senior year of basketball. Like that's how early and impactful OCD has been on my life. It hit me in a very traumatic way, very early. And as soon as I graduated high school, I found booze and alcohol and parties, and I found that for like 4 hours on the weekends, or 8 hours depending on how many days I go out. I had a window of time where I felt normal and I felt like I wasn't being tortured by my own internal oppressions. And so partying and booze became a heavy escape mechanism for me, and that continued into my 20s. All along, I did end up going and getting some help with medication. Like, I remember being 19 and driving around and having another massive nervous breakdown is what I can only think of about how to describe it. Panic attack, but it was an entire breakdown. And I drove around Columbus, Ohio, driving in and out of the mental hospital's parking lot. And I would get there and I would park and I would say I was going to go in, and then I would get scared and I would drive out, and I drove around in my car for 8 hours, and I finally ended up at a hospital there and talked to just a on-site psychiatrist, and they prescribed me Klonopin, which at the time seemed like it seemed like a miracle drug. It seemed like a magic bullet to my problems. And that's the insidiousness of that type of stuff, or when you get medicated but you don't have the therapy to back it up or the understanding of what's going through. And so I kind of bounced around different social workers and stuff like that who didn't have a good grasp of what OCD was, nor was I willing to talk about it. So I think there was a lot of, it wasn't just, it wasn't like I was going in and talking to people and they were misdiagnosing me. I was going in, I was being pretty quiet myself. Both me trying to be kind of the stereotypical stoic male representation, as well as the fear of like, if I talk about what's really going on in my head, then I'm going to be locked up. And so I was prescribed, by a few different clinicians, SSRIs in my 20s. I was still partying, never really talked about it. When I went and saw therapists, we more talked about life. I had the one therapist who gave me the rubber band on the wrist technique, where like every time I had a thought, you snap your wrist, like that's gonna help. And I went through a lot of things, and I love Central Ohio, and it's growing and it's getting better, but the resources for OCD in the Midwest, at least around that region, are pretty slim. And I finally got to about 30, and my OCD had gotten so bad where I became dysfunctional to a capacity of not being able to leave a lazy boy chair that I had. And I quit a job that was toxic, and I lost structure, and I went on unemployment at 30, 31 without any kind of direction. And I basically sat in a chair for 2 years. I would show up for social events just to say hi and let people know that I was fine. You know, I was a craftsman at making masks. I got very good at becoming an actor, and I feel like I should get some sort of award, or maybe I should go to LA or something like that. But I think other people can relate that I got very good at disguising my internal environment with being able to navigate social environments very well, with skills picked up on how to, like, you know, a lot of it was like being overly nice and not wanting to getting kicked out of social circles by appeasing others and stuff like that. So I ended up losing a lot of self-confidence in the way that I handled stuff like that. So it finally got to the point where I was 32, and it somehow in between all this, I managed to get a college degree from Ohio State. Somehow I was able to do that in 2008. But because I was still undiagnosed, and then because I was still suffering in silence, any kind of education that I got was solely based on me following a framework or a structure that I thought people just did. You know, I didn't go to school because I had dreams of becoming a thing or a career that I wanted to follow. I went to school because it was something I thought I had to do, or it was something that I felt like it would impress my dad or give me some sort of inspiration to find something. But when you're so clouded in thought, any kind of vision, especially long-term vision, wasn't there. I never thought my horizon was bright. I lived my life in my 20s with this disease and other comorbidity, with a very dark horizon and with the understanding that I would probably be dead soon. And that's how I lived my life. So when I graduated, it wasn't like, all right, you graduated into life and now you're going to move on to your next goal. I graduated with like, all right, that was my goal, to graduate.
Yeah.
And so I graduated, and then I was left with a, you know, kind of this strategic communications degree that I didn't really care about, or wasn't really in line or parallel. You know, it didn't really mesh well with my personality. So. Yeah, values, what I wanted to accomplish. So a lot of existential stuff happened in terms of ruminative thought, and then from 2008. Which I was 28, to 2012, which I was 32, I don't know what you would call it, middle of the road OCD, like the moderate severity of OC, which was still keeping me functional.
Yeah.
I was in pain and suffering, and I was in a whole lot of hell, and life sucked, but I was still able to do something.
Yeah.
Transferred over to a severity of pure incapacity, you know, just total disability. And I got to the point when I was 32, couldn't leave my chair. I would get up and be able to go to the bathroom. And for your audience, again, my OCD still was based around strong harm-based OCD, a lot of scrupulosity OCD. I'm not particularly religious, but I still got caught up in the magical thinking and the what if things about religion and magic, and if I did this, then that means I would ruin someone's life, or if I closed the door wrong, that means my family would die, or for someone who wasn't very religious, I had a strong obsession with the devil and the evil. And so any numbers revolving around 666 or 13, I couldn't be around, or there was a lot of emotional contamination that happened with me. If I was around someone who I thought or I deemed was evil or something like that, I feel like that I would absorb
Yeah.
that. And so my compulsions were about that. And it got to the point where it took me 8 hours to put on a pair of pants. So I stopped putting on a pair of pants. And, um, and this is kind of random. I don't know if anybody who's listening can relate. I have these floaties. You know what floaties are in your eye?
Yeah.
Kind of proteins that kind of flash over your eye every once in a while. I apparently have a lot of those. So I would have to almost control the floaties so they wouldn't go over someone's head, because if they crossed over their face, it meant that I wanted to hurt them. So if I made my floaties go up over their head and back around, that meant I didn't want to. So you can ask, if you ask anybody in my life, my 20s, my best friends, you'll hear them say that you looked up a lot and you were looking, your eyes were all over the place. And I had a lot of facial tics that were counteracting. Like if my right eye closed, I would have to tick my left eye to make it balanced out, or that meant that I was something bad was going to happen. I can't remember in particulars. And then by the time I was 32 and stuck in my chair, a lot of it was obsessions about being a sociopath and being an evil person. And I would find evidence, if I watched like a show, I would be like, I think like that guy, or like these thoughts that I'm having are telling me that I'm this evil person. And so I had a lot of identity problems with who I was. And there was very, very deep issues with my internal core. And so I had convinced myself that I was a psychopath, a sociopath, a serial killer in the making, and that if I let myself out or release myself into society and let go, then I would be a mass murderer. And so that's what I dealt with in between my eyeballs for a while. And so to kind of wrap this up, I got to 32 and I knew that I didn't want to die.
Yeah.
I had been suicidal a couple times, and in silence. I didn't, not something that I told anybody, or did I call 911? I got through it myself. But I got to the point where like there was like a little shred of hope and like self-compassion, where like I knew there's stuff there inside me. Like I knew that I had potential. I knew that there was something there if I could just tap into this and get out of this suffering. And I finally went to my dad and I was like, Dad, man, I don't know what's going on, but something is going on and I need help.
Yeah.
So we started to do some research, and we ended up going down to there was nothing in Central Ohio. We ended up going down to a facility in Cincinnati called the Lindner Center of Hope. And I met a wonderful doctor who also runs the Midwest affiliate of the IOCDF, called Dr. Charles Brady. And he's an amazing soul. And we did a 2-day neuropsych eval. And he was part of that team. He was the lead of that team. And he came, he sat my dad and myself down. We were in front of him and a chalkboard. And he basically laid down how severe my OCD was. And he mentioned that they had a 2 or 3 week facility for OCD. But he was like, listen, your OCD is way surpassed what we can do at our own facility. So he gave us some options. And there were a few high-level residential programs at the time. There still are, and they included, Rogers in Wisconsin. There was L.A. There was a place in Houston, and then there was Massachusetts. There was Boston and McLean, and we tackled it like looking for colleges. We researched a lot. We talked to everybody, and we came to the conclusion that McLean was the best fit, especially insurance-wise. Unfortunately, not all the facilities at that time in 2012 were willing to be flexible with insurance. And McLean was wonderful with insurance and gave people who couldn't afford it a chance. And I just got a certain vibe from the intake person I talked to. Was amazing. I'm not going to say names, but the person I talked to was just so amazing with myself and my dad. and I started full-on diagnostic-based treatment for OCD at McLean, August 27th, 2012, at Orchard House at McLean. So,
Nice.
and that was the start of the journey of kind of rebuilding my life and my brain and my soul and what's my values and who I was, who I am, what I wanted to be. And it's been a road, man. It's been a wonderful road. It's been a low road. It's been a high road. It's been rocky. Sometimes there's a slide in there where you feel good and comfortable, but yeah, I'm on my way from being someone who couldn't brush his teeth, put on a pair of pants, or be around anybody, to someone who is talking with you here today, Stuart. And again, while I'm talking, I want to again really appreciate, or make sure I thank you for doing this podcast and asking me to be involved in something so important. So, thank you.
Thank you, man. It's a pleasure. Yes. Pleasure to have you on. You know, I've been trying to get you on for about a year, and you keep dodging me. So
this is an exposure. We talked about it. This is Stuart has been trying to get me on for a long time, and I knew the platform that this podcast had, and it was something that I was nervous about. I wanted to get some programs more developed so I could talk about them. And Stuart has asked me many, many times to come on here. And as long as, in addition to him becoming a very good friend of mine, it got to the point where I wanted to talk and wanted to talk about things and share. So
yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I'll say I didn't want you just on because we're friends, but I wanted you on because I like your story and I believe it's inspiring and people need to hear it. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, your voice makes me feel very calm, and I enjoy listening to you, Stuart. You can talk. You can read the alphabet to me anytime you want, man.
Maybe I'll do an audio book.
You should totally read the alphabet.
Bedtime with Stuart.
I guarantee you're going to be on Amazon's top selling authors for that.
But here's something funny, slight detour, and we get straight back to your story. Growing up, I was really self-conscious about my voice. I didn't like it. I think someone may have said something to me once, which obviously triggered me, and then I was focused on it.
I can see how that would happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just didn't like it, and I would talk quietly, and I wouldn't speak, and now. Yeah, loads of people say, "Oh, we find your voice comforting," and all this, and I'm like, "It's," and I just find that.
Well, now you have your own damn podcast where you have to talk. It's so cool how that evolved that way. Isn't that interesting?
Exactly, but it just
I like that.
It sticks out for me as like just because you're so focused on something now and it seems so scary now, doesn't mean there's a shred of truth to it.
So it sounds like the lesson here is you were afraid to talk, so you talked.
Good point. Yeah, I exposed myself for 155 episodes or whatever.
Yeah, or I'm 157. I think you told me earlier.
Oh yeah, for this one. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So back to your story, because you're the star here, not me. So let's talk about recovery for a second. So you got into this treatment program. What were some of the core aspects of that treatment?
So initially, I was introduced to exposure and response prevention, which is ERP. And you're going to hear a lot of people saying that's the gold standard of CBT-based treatment for OCD and some other anxiety-related disorders, and it is the front line. It is standing up to your fears, and it is very effective.
Yeah.
And for my physical compulsions, for the ones that I did, at least that were lower in my hierarchy. People who are listening to this who may not understand the hierarchy in therapy is a lot of therapists will set up a hierarchy for you to tackle less stressful, less anxiety-inducing exposures first, and you work up to a higher hierarchy where your biggest fears are at the highest, and by the time you get there, you have experience to it. So a lot of what I worked on first were like the simple physical compulsions, being able to put my shoes on, being able to dress myself, being able to write, being able to feed myself. And the ERP worked just amazing with that. And I do want to note that in my experience with the ERP, and I don't want people to get too wrapped up about the administration of ERP, but I will tell you that the coaches and the people who do the ERPs with you is really important. At least it was important for me.
Yeah.
So not only was the ERP important, but the way that it was administered to me by people who knew what they were doing was very highly effective. So I was able to get through some compulsions that I was struggling with for 7 years, and in 2 weeks, I could put on my shoes and not think about it the rest of the day, which to me is like groundbreaking watershed shit.
Yeah.
And to anybody who doesn't struggle with this stuff, so hearing someone be just exuberantly happy about being able to put on a pair of shoes may not be a big deal. But I think people who struggle with the disorder can understand that when you're able to do simple acts, daily acts of life, ATLs, I can't remember what that acronym means, activities of daily life or something like that. When you're able to do that again, like talking about like filling or building a foundation of confidence from the get-go. And my stay initially at the OCDI was 90 days, and it is intense. It is intense. It is from 8:30 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, and it is group based. It is individually based when you're working with your BT by yourself. It's individually based when you're working with your coach. It's milieu based, so you have a community around you. And I think that dynamic approach, that multi-headed beast that was the OCDI in terms of ERP sessions, good eating, sleeping well, people being around you who are struggling with you, and who you can talk to and share stories with and grow confidence with, educational groups, support, that is quite a powerful program, and it changed my life. It changed my life, and I'm 38 now. It's been 6 years, and I've had to go back a couple times. Not, and it's a little complicated. We can get into it more, but the ERP was amazing for the initial compulsions and stuff like that. What I needed more experience with was with a therapy model called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is mindfulness-based stuff. And it was introduced to me in the first time I went to McLean, and it helped significantly then. Went home 33 with motivation, but I still felt there were still things that we didn't get to. And a lot of it was the identity, personality-based obsessions and ruminations that I had that we just didn't have time for. And so that still kind of stuck with me. It wasn't like the things that I worked on at the OCDI came back, because to this day, I can put my shoes on 2 at a time or not at all, and I'm fine, or I can put my pants on, whatever, that type of stuff. I've totally gotten okay with the evil stuff like that. Like even to a morbid curiosity part of it, you almost you allow yourself to even enjoy some of that stuff, like horror movies.
Yeah.
People enjoy that. There's a whole genre of people enjoying that stuff. So I got to that, but I got home, still didn't have a job, so a lot of depression came back in, and a lot of the ruminative and strictly mental ritualistic types of situations, those are the ones that exaggerated after I left for the first time. So physical compulsions, I'm good. Ticking compulsions, I had it covered. I'm good. But I still was not, I still was struggling with the fact that I was this sociopath person and obsessing about the way that I handled certain situations, or like just watching a movie and I felt like I should be more remorseful, like small little things like that. I would just build this body of evidence to the fact that, like, dude, you are one evil dude. And it even got to the point where I got so depressed, and I called the director of the OCDI and my old BT at the OCDI. I actually called them for a referral about 3 years after my initial stay in 2012, and I was like, "Hey, you guys were awesome. You guys kicked my OCDI's butt, or OCD's butt, but I got this other stuff. I got personality issues. I think I'm a sociopath, and I'm depressed. And I was wondering if you guys knew another residential program that you could send me to." And I remember specifically the director getting back to me, and she was like, "Sean, get your butt back here." I'm like, "What are you talking about? Don't debate with me. Write out another application. We'll get you back in here. I'll see you in a couple months, or we'll get you back in the residential program, because there's just more." And they saw that. They saw that from 900 miles away, that what I was struggling with was still a manifestation of my OCD symptomology. Yeah. And the second time I went was in 2014 to 2015 at McLean again. It was the worst winter Boston has ever seen. 10 feet of snow in a month, and we continued with ERP work, but we switched tactics to a lot of heavy ACT work, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of accepting these thoughts as something that may never go away, but damn it, I'm going to live my life no matter what. And I'm going to take the power away from those, and I'm going to give the power back to myself, and I'm going to live the life that I need to live through my own values. So we worked extensively with the personality issues that I was struggling with, and the feeling of numb and these nihilistic feelings, and my BT. And I don't know if I should name names on here or not.
It's up to you.
I worked with my hero and my mentor, Dr. Jason Elias, and his team. And Jason was my BT, and I am forever in his debt, quote unquote, for someone who's helped save my life. And we worked daily on accepting me for who I was. Stopping the ruminative response problems that I was having, and go out and live. So my exposures the first time were more like, all right, we're going to have you put on your shoes once, and then you're going to have to deal with the anxiety differently. This time, Jason sent me out into the public, and I was volunteering, and I was like living life, because he felt that a lot of my exposures weren't necessarily the compulsions anymore. The triggers were life itself, and me being in relationships, and me owning the negative parts of me, and me owning the positive parts, and the self-compassion. Yeah. And that's where the second time around, where a lot of the ERP fell a little bit by the wayside, to the experiential ACT things that I was doing, and he would take me to improv night in Boston, where I was forced to get in front of everybody and just off the cuff be whoever I wanted to be and be totally genuine. And he came with me, and he's about as nervous as I was about going. But that's what these BTs do. There is they give up a lot of they challenge their own fears, and we just did this amazing work. And in tandem of the ACT work and the ERP work I did the second time, I decided to build upon my own personal growth and move to Boston. I had packed my car excessively heavy driving out this time, and one was for a very morbid reason, and one was for a very hopeful reason. The morbid reason was I was so depressed and hopeless at the time that I was going to, if this didn't work, I was going to keep driving and driving and driving until my resources ran out, and I was going to commit suicide. The hopeful version was I was going to show up to McLean and I was going to work my ass off again.
Yeah.
And part of that was deciding to leave Columbus, Ohio, which I had lived in for 30 years, not live with my dad anymore, find a full-time job, find my own apartment, all in the middle of the worst winter ever, and develop my artwork and the art projects that I had wanted to start for a long time that I never had access to. Now I have the capacity to start them and build them, and that was my plan. And I was ready to start at the bottom level. I found an apartment in Somerville with 5 other people paying low rent, and I found a job at Whole Foods stocking tuna fish, and I found a cheap art studio where I sat there and started to design draw your monster type projects and illustrations and artwork, and I started to build, and then I was in a new city by myself for the first time, which was an exposure, and these were all things that I needed to do.
Yeah.
The exposures weren't in the therapy room anymore for me. I had graduated into the exposures of life and the triggers of life, and instead of escaping from them and hiding from them or looking for safe spaces, I needed to stand up for them and take responsibility and respond to them differently, and that's how I continued my growth the second time around. And that was about, it's 2019. That was about 2.5-3 years ago.
Yeah. Nice. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing and being so open and vulnerable.
Absolutely.
I enjoyed listening to that, and I'm sure everyone else has. So you mentioned there about your art projects and Draw Your Monster and the Monster Initiative now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about that, kind of the thinking behind it and what it's all about.
Do you want to know about Draw Your Monster, or do you want to know about how drawing and artwork has been something important in my life?
Both.
Because we could go either way. Okay. What would you like?
However you want to merge the two together. I'll let you do that.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Monster Initiative. And the Monster Initiative is an organization that is basically an umbrella for many other projects that I want to either start or I've already started, which includes Draw Your Monster, graphic novels, volunteer programs, games, puzzles, and toys that I'm going to develop, expressive platforms, books, motivational talks, advocacy, peer support, stigma fighting campaigns, research, data analysis, and gallery work and artwork. Along with some other ideas that revolve around something that I call a monster box, which I'm not going to get too much into because it's at the beginning stages. And one of the programs I developed underneath this umbrella initiative was called Draw Your Monster, and I was so inspired by the ACT work that I did in at the OCDI that I wanted to follow through and help share some of these attributes and some of these terminologies that were so important to me. And it actually got started because I was working out of a makerspace in Somerville, which is kind of a gym membership for artists. So I had my own space, and you share the workspaces, and the public has the capacity to email blast the membership if they need any projects that they need help with, or they have a thing. And this one guy got a hold of me, or he got a hold of the membership, and I got back to him. He was looking for artists to work a Somerville teen outreach program for him, and he wanted someone to maybe work a table or show their artwork or talk about mental health. And I was in that mode where I was raising my hands for everything. I wanted to try everything. I wanted to do everything. So I raised my hand. I might have been the only guy that got back to him, and I said yes to him. And this is a week before the actual night, and I remember getting off the phone and thinking, I just agreed to something that I have no clue what the hell I'm going to do. I didn't, I had a very minimal body of work, and I was like, I don't want to just show up with a couple like doodles. I want like these kids to be interactive. I want them to learn something from me. And that's when I started to really think about metaphors and symbolism and allegory, and how much storytelling and metaphors meant to me, and how much I had enjoyed monsters and creatures growing up. And there was a couple exercises that I did in the OCDI that use monsters in a different way. And I'm like, man, what a wonderful metaphor a monster could be to fear or something uncomfortable, and then changing your relationship to it. So 2.5 days before the event, I wrote up an entire program, and I cut out all the paper lanyards, and I bought all this twine, and I made my own necklaces all at home, and I wrote out these instructions, and it was the first implementation officially of Draw Your Monster, and the kids just ate it up. I had the entire night where kids were coming up to me, and we were talking about the definitions of ACT, what they meant, and then I was challenging them to draw something uncomfortable, but instead of fighting it and getting wrapped up in it, losing power to it or losing energy, I asked them to change a different perspective on something that scares them, and like basically open the door for it. And in a way that expansion works, where you allow space for something uncomfortable, and with time and with the added work of partaking in your own values, the monster or that thing that you let in tends to dissipate and lessen and takes away less of your energy. Yeah. And so that's kind of what I started out doing. I had people draw something very uncomfortable on a piece of paper called a monster, and then they would wear it around their neck, and then they would go interact and socialize with the idea that after like 3 or 4 hours, they would forget about this thing was even around them. And I had people come back to me. It was kids. It was 14 to 18-year-old kids, and a lot of the adults that were working with it. They came back and were like, "I just did this very uncomfortable thing. I put some trauma on paper, and I went out there and danced, and I totally forgot it was around my neck." And it just made me realize, it was like this realization that's possible, that I could live a life or a night with something being there, but me being mindful in different ways.
Yep.
Me interacting with the present moment, and the scary thing that was scratching at my insides felt like a fluffy pillow. I forgot about it, and it was great. And they came back because I totally forgot it was around my neck, and I left glowing. Like, I left glowing. I left like, this is what I need to develop this. This is something that could be big. I don't know how, don't know what, in what way exactly, but this is what and I remember I had just gotten a new job at the time too, that I was kind of like, what am I doing? I was moving up from Whole Foods. I got a production assistant management job, and I had this experience. And I'm like, oh man, the next day I got to go do this when that is what I want to be doing. And so I continued to develop Draw Your Monster, and I decided to contact the IOCDF. And I initially didn't know how I was going to submit it. I know the IOCDF has a submittal process. I didn't know how to submit this thing. I thought that I would just email them and be like, "Hey, I built this thing. Can I just go in the lobby or something? Can I have a table in the lobby?" And they ended up getting back to me like, "Hey, this sounds great. We're really interested. This is what a really good idea. But you have to go through a full submittal process and stuff like that." So I went through the submittal process and got it submitted, and it got accepted for the Chicago 2016 conference as a nighttime youth event, I think, on a Friday night. And I spent as soon as I was accepted, and I went to work. I worked 40 to 50 hours a week at work, and then I would come home and I would work about 30 hours a week on developing this project. And I finally made it to Chicago with a room full of artwork and designs and challenges for people and the whole Draw Your Monster thing. And I learned a lot from that experience, and since then have thought of ideas of how to better the project, how to streamline it, simplify it, and make it a little bit more unique and accessible. So that was the beginning of it becoming a bigger thing. And to kind of parlay that into how drawing and artwork has helped me, I've always thought that sometimes in some people's lives, maybe kids, maybe me, whatever, being able to articulate or relay certain things that are going on may be tough or uncomfortable. Especially to someone who you don't trust, in particular a new therapist. So artwork and drawing has always helped me release some of the anger or frustration and tension that I've had. It's allowed me to have an emotional mind and have emotional experiences in a rational and logic demanding world, in a world that demands this logical thinking and rational, calm thought. I was having trouble with that. I understand the importance of that, but I also understood that we're human and we're emotion first, thought second, and artwork and the creation of things and the curiosity and imagination that is involved with that helped me balance that out. It helped me have an emotional Sean, and it helped me have a rational, logical Sean. It was a way for me to say fuck you if I wanted to. It was a way for me to say I love you if I wanted in my own way. And it helped bring out this intrinsic curiosity and wonder that I've had since I was such a kid. I was a why guy, and I was a curiosity connoisseur. I don't know, I just made that up. But I was all about trying to understand my environment and understanding. I was always curious about the next level of things. And it's helped me stay kid-like. I think there's important as we grow into adults that you hold on to a lot of your inner child, because I think that is a very innocent and playful part of you. And there's a couple of quotes that I really enjoy from the literary genius, the Nobel Prize winner, George Bernard Shaw. And one of his quotes that I enjoy the most is, "We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing." And he's got another quote called, "Life isn't about finding yourself, it's about creating yourself." And that is a mantra or an idea or a philosophy that I've come to develop myself and evolve in my own way. And I guess the Sean Shinnock version of that is, life isn't about chasing, it's about building things. And I think when I felt myself chasing meaning or chasing things, I wasn't building the structure and the foundation of something tangible and thick and deep and dense. But when I started to build things, build self, build meaning, build quality friendships, those were things you could hang your hat on. So very much artwork has helped me keep an inner child that has been playful and that wants to dance. And I hope that I don't lose that. And I think that artwork can allow you to tap into that. And artwork can be any kind of things, music, dance, whatever. I hope people who are maybe missing something in their life can maybe challenge themselves to get creative and imaginative, because I think it's going to open up some possibilities to them. What I enjoy most about my journey with artwork is that the way that it's helped me build character. I've had a hard, long relationship with failure and mistakes. I had a fixed mindset growing up, and anytime you start something new or you put something creative down on a piece of paper, you're bound to be personally affected by failure and mistakes and something that you didn't like.
Yep.
So like anything, like any kind of practice, the beginning parts of practice or working on anything can be highly stressful because you just suck at it. So as I was able to get through the sucky part of it, the hard work where you're doing wind sprints and you're hating the wind sprints, metaphorically, that's when the confidence was built. You know, art has taught me a lot of things. Art has taught me how to deal with conflicts in the way of criticism, like putting myself out there and getting people giving me information back that they didn't like that. Like I've lived my life as someone who has done anything that I could to get someone's appreciation or to have them like me. And for someone to put down a piece of creative content that is unique to them and have it criticized is such a personal and vulnerable experience that there's a couple different ways that you could take that. And one is you shut down and you take it personal and you maybe not grow from it, or you take that as a learning experience, maybe take the constructive criticism and you keep working and you build. Yeah. And it's made me attack my perfectionism. Something I didn't go into with my journey of OCD is I struggle heavily with perfectionism. So it literally teaches you that if you're going to be perfectionistic about your artwork, you are never going to get anything done, and it's going to be a miserable, awful experience. To be so rigid totally takes away the intrinsic spirit of art, which is loose and compassionate and flowing and accepting. It's taught me a lot about humbleness. Even as I've gotten better at an artist, if you go on Instagram for like 1 minute, you're going to see 75,000 other artists who are levels above you. And I've had to respond to that not as all right, I'm going to toss my pencil out the window because what I want to do is what that guy's doing. He's already done it. But instead, double down on your style and what you want to accomplish. Yeah. And that's all perspective and mindset based. I think that everyone on this planet has the power to do artwork and be creative. And I think that anyone who says they don't have the capacity to be creative just hasn't worked hard enough at it for long enough. Yeah. Or they're still letting internal mechanisms control them, like fear and shame. There's a lot to be said about putting something on a blank canvas that is uniquely yours. You're offering a part of your internal soul onto something physical that someone now can see visibly. And I think that's a roadblock for a lot of people who say that they're not creative. That's something that I've had to deal with. And I think that anybody, no matter who you are, if you can get through two things, I think you have the capacity of being an amazing creative person. And I think that's one, working hard and not giving up. You can't just draw one thing and hate it and throw it away and say that you suck. And then getting over how vulnerable it is to say something new and different that's never been said before. Because when you doodle something, it's literally the first time that's ever been done.
Yeah.
When you share that with somebody, that is quite a personal experience. That is sometimes too much for people. And I think that once people can get through that uncertainty, that's where a lot of wonderful creative imagination can happen. But it's tough, and I want to validate that it's tough.
Yeah.
Artwork has given me the ability to be a storyteller that I never thought I was going to be able to be. I'm not a huge I do some public speaking, but it racks my nerves and stresses me out. So I've always taken on the love of teaching people stories or writing stories with the intent of someone learning something from them in a metaphorical way. Like some of my favorite authors growing up, Roald Dahl and Brian Jacques and J.K. Rowling's, and a lot of those stories are just filled with lessons about life. And it made me want to double down in that direction of being able to tell a story that's entertaining and accessible while also getting in there and planting roots for people. So you're listening to the story and you may not expect to learn something, and then you have this wonderful experience reading a book or looking at a piece of artwork, and all of a sudden something is stuck. And I think it's cool that each person has the capacity to experience these things in an infinite different amount of ways and infinite interpretations, or at least 7.5 billion, as many people as there are on Earth. And it's been such a mind-opening, heart-opening, vulnerable experience to become a storyteller through art. Because art is for me, it's been a grand teacher. Outside of sports, which is another area that I've learned a lot from teacher or artwork. I mean, I've learned about biology, I've learned about psychology, I've learned about philosophy, I've learned about human behavior. If you want to depict, and if you want to elicit emotion from a human, you have to understand how humans work, and you have to understand what theory of mind is, which is the understanding that not everyone may think and have a worldview the same as yours. Yeah. And that has taught me a lot. My dad has always gotten on me about having a lifetime sport. Basketball and football are not lifetime sports because one thing has happened. You get old, and you break down, and some lifetime sports might be like skiing or like
golf,
tennis, golf. Golf is a great example where you play that. And art to me has become my lifetime sport. It's something that no matter what happens, it's always something that I'm going to have, which will never leave me bored. I'm always going to have the capacity, as long as I'm mentally there and cognitively speaking, I'm going to be able to tell a story, and I'm going to be able to do artwork which could impact other people, and it could also help me express things that I need to express. people always ask me about motivation and inspiration and how do I get any kind of motive and inspiration, or what is my inspiration? And a lot of it, I just tell them, a lot of it is from going outside and observing nature. A lot of it is understanding human consciousness, and I build off the small little tidbits that I get from nature and from the way that humans and consciousness happens, and I just make that creative in my own way. Like, if you go out, there's a million different textures on the walls. There are stories inside the way that like things are built, or like the way that a tree looks. Like a lot of my creatures and monsters, the beginnings of them were tree trunks or tree roots. Um, I see a lot of faces in nature. There's a terminology called pareidolia, where it's the ability to see, and everybody has it. You know, humans intrinsically are made up to see faces and mirror themselves in nature and other things. So I've literally gone on hikes and I've seen this wonderful old man in a tree, and I took a picture of it and I came back and I fleshed out the face, and that was wonderful inspiration for a character that just made the next step so much easier about his backstory. And then all of a sudden you're creating characters about this old man tree person that started out as seeing a face in a tree. And I think there's a lot to be said. And I think that there's stories out there that can help inspire you. I think art has the potential to articulate messages with a parallax perspective. And what parallax is when you're looking at an object from one point of view, if you take a couple steps to the left or the right, depending on the environment behind it and the sun, you have a total different perspective of the same object you were just looking at. And I think that transfers so nicely to mindsets and perspective, and the way that you look at your life, you look at certain things that you're struggling with, a perspective on a certain conflict that you have, that maybe if you take a couple steps to the left and look at it a different way, you can open up to things and become more connected with that person's side of the story, which I think has been critical in terms of my own interpersonal relationships, learning how to change perspective. And in general, artwork or any type of artistic expression, dance, music, painting, whatever, is highly meditative. It's highly mindfulness based. Outside of playing basketball for 2 hours, where you kind of get in that zone, doing artwork and putting on some candles, putting on some music, and really allowing yourself to stay there and presently, man, does that help you get into a zone and into these flow states, which becomes this healthy escapism where you're creating and you're exploring your mind, and you're not, where it's almost like everything else is blurred, and in that moment the most focused thing is the thing right in front of you. And that's such an enjoyable experience. Art has also given me a sense of purpose. It's given me it's given me the what's the word I'm trying to think here? I'm going blank here, but it's given me access to helping others with a Draw Your Monster and stuff like that. It's kept me vulnerable and uncertain, which, if there's a way to practice challenging vulnerability and uncertainty, like I talked about, it's putting a new idea out there that nobody has thought of. And that is scary. And I think it's a way to get outside of the wall of the body. The body tends to hide a lot of the internal things that are going on. And I think once you're able to transcend the skin and the physicalness of your being and put your soul out there, there's a lot of growth, whether it's through positive feedback or negative feedback. And I think that's crucially important when you're being creative. And ultimately, I always looked at art and creative creativity as a personal relationship with fear, and how you handle that. The fear of performing, the fear of being judged,
Fear of being seen.
Fear of being seen. Wonderfully put, Stuart. So that in a long kind of segment there is how much being creative and imaginative and artwork has meant to me. It's very important, and I hope that people who are looking for ways to change their lives, incorporate using their imagination, tapping into their playful kid, and just putting things out on paper. Someone may never have to see it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I think the act of getting it outside of your immediate body is an act of self-compassion at its highest.
Yeah, separation as well from thinking you are the thought to actually no, it's in front of me now. It's not me.
That's a wonderful way of putting it, and that can happen. That is so healing and cathartic to be able to take something that is scary, take power over it, take it outside of the body, and paint it, and understand that concept of what you just said.
Yeah. No, thank you for going into that. There's loads of good information in there, and I like how you've observed something like, you know, art is this big concept, this big thing, but you've taken it and you've learned lots of life lessons from it, which I think people can do from anything, and it's great to see you doing it in that field as you have done with basketball.
Yeah.
And I've done it with basketball, and I find water is another one. If I just staring at a lake, I learn so much.
That is a good being around water, being inside water, is meditative.
Yeah, really calming.
And really nice.
Cool. So some quick fire questions now. Then is you could pick up the phone and call the 20-year-old Sean. What would you tell him?
Oh, it comes back to vulnerability for me. It comes back to I held things so tightly inside. I would say let people in, let people help you, ask for help. Work on your jump shot.
Yeah.
Also pick up that guitar.
Yeah, nice. Cool, good advice. And then next question is, you have a billboard in Boston. What do you want written on that billboard for everyone to see?
Oh, man. I feel like it should say, it would be a challenge. I would challenge people. I would challenge people to research what compassion means to them.
Okay.
That's all I would say.
Challenge to what compassion means to them.
I challenge you to try to understand what compassion means to you.
And is that...
They'll do the rest.
Yeah, just to get them thinking about it, because most people don't.
What does that mean to them? What does compassion mean to them? Do they need to recheck what that means? Does it mean they need to do more self-compassion? Does it mean that they need to look at someone else differently that they judged maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love it. Yeah, absolutely. I haven't had that one on here before. Cool. So any sort of, we've just agreed to do a part 2 very soon.
Yeah.
Is there any closing remarks before then, though?
I'll give you one little sentence of words of hope that you asked for. Cool. How about that?
Yeah, let's do it.
And it is, I always feel that there is never an actual loss of hope. There is only the perception of the loss of hope. And I understand that can be powerful. But there is no loss of hope. There's only the perception of loss of hope. So hope exists.
Excellent. I love it. And we won't unpack that. What we'll do is we'll leave that as a hook to come back to part two.
All right. That works. That works. I got more.
Cool. But thank you for your time, man. And going into so much
Stuart.
detail.
Thanks for having me on. I respect you and I respect what you do so much, and you're doing great big things, and it's I think it's helping a lot of people. So thank you.
Yeah, likewise, man. I appreciate it. So there you have it. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sean. Our part 2 will be coming very soon. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.